Hi everybody, this is Ron Kander, and today we're going to do a brief introduction to Stella. Start by showing you the basic commands that will allow you to draw your first simple model. When you open up the software, it will look like you see on the screen right here. On the left is a white area that is where we will build our models. On the right, collapsed right now, is a tray or an information tray. I'm going to open it up by hitting this little triangle. Now if you prefer, you can leave it here and open and close it like I just did, or you can detach it from the sheet and move it off screen to another spot if you want more room to work. So since I did that, I'm going to zoom this sheet up to much larger size. You probably won't want to do this when you're building a big model, but for this small one, it'll make it much easier to see on the screen. So I'm going to start by looking at the layout of the software here for just a second. You'll notice in the upper left-hand corner, there's a set of icons that run across from left to right that identify the various objects we'll be using to build our models, and the graphs and tables that we can build when we start analyzing our models and running simulations. There are 4 basic worksheets, and those are identified by the tabs that run down the left-hand side. And those are maps, which is where we are now. We're going to build our map. Model, which is where we'll run our model. Equation, which is where the equations for your model get built in the background by Stella. You don't have to do this. And then an interface, which is where you can build an interactive interface to allow your users to play with your model and use it to develop insights. So let me start by building our first stock and flow model. I will click once on the stock icon, grab it, and bring it down to the center of the screen. Click once. There's our first stock. I'm going to give it the name cash. We're interested in watching how much cash builds up in our wallet as we bring in income and we make expenditures and have expenses. So there's the name. You'll notice that the name can be grabbed and moved to various spots around. You can't move it anywhere, but you can move it to the 4 sides, above, below, left, and right of the stock. Now there's going to be 2 flows. We're going to have income coming in that increases our cash stock, and we'll have spending out that decreases our cash stock. So to put those flows in, you have to come up here to the icon that looks like a little valve. It's called a flow. I'm going to click it once. Notice the little icon is coming with me. Click once and drag, and I've created this flow arrow. I can move it around, and it's connected from out here outside of our system. That's what the little cloud means. So that's an infinite supply of money that's coming in from that side. And this will be our income flowing into our cash stock. Similarly, I'm going to create an outflow by this time doing the opposite. I'm going to click inside my stock and drag out. And you'll notice that this time the arrow connects inside the stock and then flows out to a cloud, which is implying that the money after we spend it goes off into the ethers and we never see it again, much like real life. So this will be spending. So we now have an income and spending that both add to and subtract from our cash. So we're going to make an assumption in this simple model that we have a fixed amount of cash to start with. We have a fixed income that comes into us every month, and we spend 10% of however much cash is in our wallet, in our stock, each month. So I need to know how much cash I have in order to figure out how much I'm going to spend. Now the way we do that in our models is with one of these little action connectors. I'm going to click that action connector. I'll do it, then I'll tell you what it does. I'm going to click it once to create that little action connector. I'm going to start inside my cash, and then I'm going to drag it over, click and drag, to spending, to that valve in my spending flow, and let go. Now I've created this red arrow that I can size, what it's implying here is that in order to calculate how much I spend in a given month, I need to know how much cash I have that month. In other words, this cash variable has to flow into spending calculation in order for me to calculate it properly. Okay, so I've created my little model. That's all we're going to do to create a model. Now I can highlight this whole model and move it around the screen as I see fit, just to organize things if I want. So there's my model. There's my map. So let's go over to the model page. The map is the physical visualization of my system. The model is where I'm going to actually add equations. So I'm going to click over here on the model tab. Notice I still see my map, but now something different has happened. Some question marks have appeared inside of the various variables, the cash, the income, and the spending. The reason those are there is because as I've built this model, Stella is building a set of equations in the background to try to run a simulation of this model over time. And in fact, if I go to the equation tab, you'll see those equations up here. You'll notice that there's a little difference equation that says if I want to know how much cash I have at time t, I need to know how much cash I had in the previous time step. So let's say my time step is months. If I want to know how much cash I have this month, I need to know how much cash I had last month, how much income I made during that month, and how much I spent during that month. So if I take how much I had last month, add my income for this month, subtract what I spent this month, that'll tell me how much cash I have left at the end of the month. So that makes sense. However, it doesn't know yet how much initial cash I had to start with, how much income comes in a month, or how much I spend each month. See, the three equal signs don't have anything to their right. Those three equal signs are actually equivalent to the three question marks in our model. So we need to fill those in. As I moved screens, my little properties window moved. So I'm going to move it off screen here so I have a little more room. So let's start with the simplest one, cash. Before I do that, I'm going to come up to the top menu here, and under Run, I want to specify some things about my run. I haven't told it yet the total length of time of my simulation or the time unit of my simulation. I've been saying I want to do this in months. Whoops, I haven't told it that yet. My model's moving around. Sorry, scrolled my cursor there for a second. Months are what I said I want my unit of time to be. So I'm going to click months. That set it as months. And now it has to know how long I want to run this, from 0 months to how many. I'm going to say 60 months. That's 5 years. And this DT is how often you want to take a step, a time step in your model. We'll talk about that later, but I am going to set that to 1 for now. Every month I want to make a calculation. So I'm going to say OK to this model, this run specification. Now I'm all set to start adding my variables. So let's start with cash. I'm going to click the cash variable. You'll notice when I do that it highlights blue, and also the properties window over here changed to give me some information about what it needs to know. I need to know how much initial cash was in my wallet. Let's say that's $1,000. So I'm going to add 1,000 here. Now, you have the option to add units. Let's add units to this problem. I might want to do this in a money unit, of course. I could pick any. You could pick euros. I could pick Argentinian pesos. We'll do this in US dollars. So there's the US dollars units for cash. Notice also now when I come back to my model, the question mark is gone under cash. And also, if I go to equations, it's filled in the initial amount of cash right there. So let me go back to model. All right. Next thing we're going to do is put in our income. That's really relatively easy. I said, let's say we're going to make $500 a month, every month. Very simple. Now I highlighted income. It needs to know an equation for my monthly income. It's simple in this case. It's just $500 per month. Now notice that it automatically filled in the units. it was smart enough to know that if my cash stock is in dollars and my time step is months, the flow has to be in dollars per month, the inflow and the outflow. So now that I like that, I'm going to check the little green check mark down here, apply it. Now I can go on to the last variable that has a question mark next to it, and that is spending. So let me click it once. Things will be slightly different for spending because over here we have to enter an equation. Remember that I said we spend 10% of however much cash we have in our wallet that month. Well, if you go back and remember, we drew this red arrow so that the model would know when calculating spending, I need to know cash. The way that's identified over here in the properties page is up here in this area called required inputs. Notice that cash is there. It's saying I have to use the cash variable in my spending equation. Well, we said 10% of the cash gets spent, so that would be 0.1 times, you can type the times symbol or just click it here in the operations, and then I just click cash once and it automatically fills it in down here. So 10% of whatever the cash variable is what my spending is this month. And again, it got the units right, so I can just hit my green check mark. We're actually done building the model now. If I come over, notice that all the question marks are gone. And if I go to equation, all the equations have been filled in. So going back to model, I have my model here now. I could run it right now and it would work. However, I would not see any numbers anywhere. I want to know what my cash is as a function of months. And I want to know how much spending I can make in a given month. So let's plot those. That would be the best way to do that. And I'm going to go up here. There's a little graph pad icon. I'm going to click it once and bring that graph down here. Click. Notice now there's a little graph, and it is just a generic graph. It hasn't really done anything yet other than know that it's 60 months long. This little push pin allows me to pin it into my drawing. I'm going to do that once, and you'll see it changes size. And since I'm zoomed very large, it made a great huge graph. It's way too big for us to be able to see on this screen. So I'm going to shrink this down and pin it again. That's pretty good. I'll make it a little bit bigger than that. There, that's a nice size, but I don't like where it's located, so I'm going to unpin it. Start it up here. I'm sorry, I'd like to make it nice and pretty. There you go. A little bit more centered. I'm a little bit anal about this stuff. There, that looks pretty. So this is a great way for us to watch what happens to cash and spending. Now it doesn't know yet that those are the variables I want to watch. I can do that very quickly by just taking my cash, dropping it down into the graph. Now that I have cash on here, I could run this model. There's three ways to run it actually. I can come up here to the menu, the main menu, and you see there's a run button. I could click that run button and run the simulation. Alternatively, you notice I could hit Command R, that's indicated right here, or I could go down here to the run button. There's a little set of buttons down here that look like the buttons to control maybe an audio or video file when you're playing it on your computer. And there's a little run button here. Watch what happens if I hit the run button. These little blue lines are actually simulations of the actual run happening. Notice that it's flowing money in, spending is flowing out, and it just finished the simulation and populated a graph. Now that was a relatively long time, and that's because the time for the simulation you can control also. Now just to show you that for an example here, this little slider bar down here allows you to change the time, simulation speed. I'm going to take it down to the fastest. I'm going to run this one more time and notice how much quicker it runs. Boom! So you can change that at will. That's great. So let's see what this graph looks like. I'm going to double click what else we can do to this graph. Here's our graph. This is the information it tells you about the graph, so you can customize it. Before I do that, let me show you just how to add a second variable to your graph. We're following cash. I also want to follow spending. So if I click spending and click the little right arrow here, it added spending to the graph too. So I'm going to just say OK and stop there. Notice that spending, it's there actually, it's just hard to tell because the blue line, which is covered by the red line right now, is on one scale that goes from $1,000 to $5,000. The red line, which is spending, is on a scale from $100 to $500. And since they have the same shape, this scaling has put them right on top of each other. You can see the 1 here indicating the blue line and the 2 indicating the red line. They're smack dab on top of each other. Just a couple of things we can change in our graph to make it a little easier. So let me right click on the graph and say open. That brings me to the menu where I can change things on the graph. First of all, I usually like to make the lines thicker so they're easier to see. And that's this little checkbox here. Next, I want to change the axes so they don't keep scaling. And you do that in a very strange way here in Stella. But if I highlight cash, you'll notice that I have min and max scale for the y-axis here. This little plus arrow that's going up and down is implying right now that it auto-scales the graph. If I click it once, notice there's a solid line at the top and bottom. That means I'm going to fix the scale. So if I click it once and get that top down, when I do a third time, I get a circle. But I want to do this second one right there. And I'm going to make this good graph, start at 0. And I'm going to have it go to, say, 6,000. Just because that's going to be a nice number for the shape of my graph. And I'm going to say set. And what that did is set the axis for cash. Let me do the same to spending so they're on the same axis. So I like to compare numbers on the same scale so I don't get confused. So I'm going to click that little double arrow once and set the lower limit of the y-axis to 0, the upper limit to 6,000, and say set, and now say OK. Now the graph looks a little easier to read because now we can at least compare the lines in size and height. So here we started at 1,000 and it goes up to 5,000 and levels out. Our spending starts at 10% of 1,000 or 100 and goes out to 10% of 5,000, which is 500. And by the way, that's why 500 is in equilibrium, because $500 coming out, and we know our income is $500. So what's coming in is coming out. Will stay at 5,000 for a long time, essentially forever. So that's the basic way to set up a graph inside of Stella. Numbers are hard to read on this graph, so maybe you also want a numerical display, just to show you how that works. I'm going to click this little icon for numerical display once and put a numerical display right above the graph. What do I want on that? Maybe I want cash on that, so I'm just going to drag cash over onto that display. I'll set that over here to the left. Now I'll stick it below. How's that? So that tells me how much cash, and I could do the same thing if I wanted to with spending. Put another one maybe on top, and I'll put, but if I right click and say open, it lets me pick what I want to put on it. So I'll pick spending. And by the way, I could say I know spending's in dollars, so I'll change the units to dollars. And I know cash is in dollars, so I'll open that one up and make its units dollars. We'll deal with this later, but just to make it a little easier to read, so maybe I want to move this down. Maybe I want to unpin and move my graph down a little bit. Move my cash down, put my spending. So now I have sort of spending at the top, cash at the bottom, and if I run the simulation now, you can see, whoop, that went so fast. Let me slow it down so you can watch it. You can see the lines are forming and the dollar amounts are changing, and it will equilibrate out at essentially $5,000 of cash with $500 in spending. So that's a good example of a simple model being built inside of Stella. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and stop the tutorial video, the screencast. We will pick up the next screencast with doing some more interesting things.